Zadel. We've got to watch what we say. I'd like to welcome you all to the CAR leadership training. And this is going to be kind of a not a super formal thing, because I'd much rather be in person and be able to see everybody and answer your questions and have the discussions, but we'll do as best we can with the Zoom meeting. As we go through, if you would please, I'm not sure that I'll be able to catch all the chat. Holly's going to help monitor it for me if you have questions. But if you have a question on something that we're discussing, please just use the raise your hand button. I think you find it in the reactions, under the reactions tab, and raise your hand, and then I can call on you. And we've got some time, so we can sure have some interaction here. If it gets to where we're going a little too long on any one topic, then I'll move us along and keep things going. But I'd really like to have some participation. We've got a good mix of association executives, of volunteers that have been around for a while, of brand new volunteers. So we can all learn something from this. And so if you have anything, please bring it up, or I may call on some of you for examples of things as well. So just to get started here. Okay, so can everybody see us? Can you see a screen? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, good deal. So leadership excellence training. Little background, I did a book several years ago called Your Director Hat, about training to be a director on a board, and I think that's why I got roped into this. So if you've read it, it gives you a good overview about that, but we'll talk about a lot of those concepts now, but we're going to get into a lot more depth, because I don't want to make this boring for those of you that have been on it for a while, and for the new people, hopefully it won't go too quickly for you. So starting off, whoops. See if I'm changing slides. I can't see all my slides here with these monitors. So I guess we got a slide now that shows, sorry. There we go. Okay.
Greg, it's not showing on our end, just so you know.
It's not, okay.
There we go.
We got that now. Okay. So just to give you a basic overview, we have our Realtor Association is made up of three components. You might have heard of the tri-party or three-way agreement. So when you join the local association, you also join the state and the national association. So there are three distinct entities that everybody belongs to. And as you all know, they've all been growing substantially over the last few years. One of the things to remember is a local director or local association or the state association, our membership, the people in your office, in my office, they really don't care where they get services from, whether it's CAR or the local association or the national association. So promote those things, because especially at the local level, you're the one collecting those dues, and you're the face of that check they have to write every year. So take advantage of all those things. Tell them about the legal hotline, even though that's a CAR function. Tell them about the proactive stuff at NAR, even though that's an NAR function. It still is a great benefit to them, and so don't miss out on those opportunities. So again, you collect it for all three levels, and then the money goes into each one. National directors are based upon population member counts of the state association and of large associations. And so those directors are divvied up. CAR directors are divvied up based upon size of association and location. And each association gets a director. So you have a variety of ways of doing that. The local associations elect those people in different manners. Some of them move like a past president onto a CAR director, or some of them might have a separate election. I think it's important, and we'll get into conflicts of interest here in a bit, but one of the things I've seen, if you have enough people in your association, it's important to have all those people be be different people. One of the issues we run into is that if you have somebody that's a director at the state level and a director at the local level, then who are they representing? And we'll talk more about that later. But you can avoid some of those problems if you actually have different people. When you get into a larger association, I was originally in North Metro, and then we merged into Denver Metro. And when we did that, and even before when we were in North Metro, we had a policy at our local association that you couldn't be an MLS director and a local director, and you couldn't be a car director and a local director. And so the good thing about that is it spread those out. You get more people involved, and you get rid of some of the conflicts that individuals feel because they're a director at some other areas. Now, sometimes you can't do that. If you're a local president or local chairman and you're automatically your car director, then you may not be able to get rid of that. But it's something to sure think about. If you can separate those duties, it'll make it easier for people. And then we talk about the state association, and I'm going to hit, even though this is a car event, I'm going to try to keep this generic enough for everybody that's at the local level as well. So CAR right now, over 29,000 members. It's amazing the growth that's taking place. And as you all know, your associations have grown quite a bit, and you want to, when you're looking at running that association, you got to keep in mind the membership count and membership numbers, and realize that may or may not always stay the same. So be planning for that. So at CAR, you have the membership, you have about 120 volunteer directors, and those are made up of people that are appointed from different boards. They're your officers, they're your division VPs, all of those things. And then you have a leadership council, which is a subset of that. So when the board of directors, in between board of directors meetings, the leadership council has authority to do some things under the policies. So if there's an urgent thing that comes up within their limitations of the policies, they have the ability to vote on that. And they also act as kind of a funnel to coordinate what's coming to the board of directors on the agenda, so that it's a manageable amount, because you can't have a group of 120 that functions real easily. We see that in committees. I've been involved a lot at the NER level on the MLS committee, and that committee itself is over 100 people. And you can't sit there and really come up with good policy in a room like that, because it's just too many folks. So you have a subgroup. In the MLS case, it's the advisory board that comes up with the proposals, and then the whole committee gets to take a look at that. And at that level, then you can tweak things, you can vote it up and down, you can do a lot with it, but it's not really possible with 100 people to try to develop things. So keep that in mind when you're forming these groups. You have to have a group that's got enough diversity and enough input from all angles, but yet if it's too big, it's unwieldy, and you have to have smaller groups to take care of things. So you have the leadership council at CAR, then you have committees and task forces. Typically, a committee is a standing committee that goes on from year to year. Like you might have one for education or finance or member services, whereas a task force is usually more around a certain topic or an event. It might be a task force to take a look at the annual convention, and what are we going to do with that, or take a look at the golf tournament if you have one, or take a look at a merger or something like that. So you have those different abilities to take a look at things. One of the things that wanted to let you know about too is at the national level, the big picture level regarding associations. Things have changed over the last 3 years. At NER, we went from a membership number of local associations in 2020 of 1,088, and then in 2021 dropping down to 1,069, and in 2022 dropping down to 1,057. So that was a 1% change, and then a 2.8% change. And over that same time, the member count of the associations, their average count went up from 1279 to 1351 to 1465. And so what you're seeing with that trend is we have more people coming into the business, but the trend is that the number of associations is still shrinking. And that started a lot a few years ago when NER brought forward the minimum standards for associations. And then we saw a lot of mergers at that time, and we're still seeing those continue, but not at the same pace. So the trend is that there's fewer associations that are ending up larger. And it's an efficiency thing for most of it. So then back to CAR, then you have also the CEO and the CAR staff, and we're going to get into discussion about a boss or how many bosses you have and all that. Any questions about the three-way agreement or CAR's general structure? Don't see any. Holly, do we have anything in the chat?
I don't see anything.
Okay, so moving on. Other overview. So the other thing that's going on in our world is the MLS, and there's been a whole lot going on in that arena. That MLS is one of those things that associations sometimes struggle with showing value because of a lot of people join just because they think they have to, and then they have to have it for the MLS. In some of our parts of our state, you have to be a realtor to get access to the MLS. In other parts, you don't. And so it's been something that the associations have to really look at over the last several years of showing value. Whether you're a state or a local association, if somebody can get the MLS without having to be a member of your association, you've got to show value for that association and why their realtor dues are worth it. Whether it be the professional standards, whether it be the networking, the education, all of those things, it's made associations step back and say, okay, what are we providing for value? So some of the trends at the national level regarding MLS, we talked about the trends on the association side. The MLS side is in a sense similar. There's a whole lot more collaboration going on. You have two of the largest MLSs in the country, Bright and CRMLS, California, and basically Washington, D.C., the East Coast there, that are collaborating. You have Arizona and Wisconsin that are collaborating together. At the local level, we now have more collaboration between IRIS and RE Colorado as far as data sharing. Because what's going on especially with the MLS side, is geography doesn't matter. Buyers don't care if that property is in this MLS or that MLS, they want the property. Associations, sometimes geography is a little more important because of a culture. You might have a town where the culture is one thing and it's different from the culture in another part of it. As an example of that, with DMAR, with the mergers that have taken place across the city, and those of you outside of the Metro Denver area may not realize, but even inside the metro area, the cultures are different between associations and between areas. One group has their big thing is a chili cook-off, another one it's a golf tournament, or it's a casual dress versus dresser, fancier dressing up, different types of things like that. So you can have various cultures within associations, and you need to see if there's ways of taking care of that. On the MLS level, a listing is a listing, and business practices are highly regulated by the state. Our contracts are by the state, our licensure are by the state. So geography isn't as critical. And so we're seeing more and more where boundaries are taken down. And on the MLS side, right now, we're in 2020, we had 565 MLSs nationally. Now we're down to about 536. And then the same thing happening with the number of members. The count is going up. It was about 2,800 members. Now we're up to almost 3,500 members in the average MLS. So as you can see, the the trend is that consolidation as well. MLSs have a variety of ownership and governance. There isn't one that works. It's what works for a particular area. Some of you have where it's just your association and you have directors separate from that. It might be two companies, which is better than one if you can separate those duties and separate those loyalties. Others have where brokers are electing the directors for the MLS, or maybe it's a combination of the boards or the associations electing those directors. And then where it kind of becomes one is at the NAR level with policy, and those policies, similar to on the association side, when NAR sets forth policies for all the associations, NAR also sets forth policies for the MLSs that are like minimum standards, or whether they're the recent stuff that we've had with getting listings in a timely fashion, or having solds being able to be displayed on IDX or whatever it might be. So that's kind of a background on the MLS side. Questions, thoughts on that? I don't see any hands, so either I'm boring you or it's all too basic. Then we get into the, there we go. The legal and governmental, and boy, is that the hot button right now at the national level with you've got various lawsuits going on, and these affect everybody, associations, MLSs, especially MLSs, and then also the brokerage community. So because of the changing things that have gone on at the national level, you have lawsuits to be able to, when we passed the clear cooperation, there were lawsuits about that, or there's been lawsuits where parties want to get the benefits of an MLS but not join the MLS. There's been lawsuits all over the place. Now, the most recent one I saw was about lock boxes and some of the proprietary information that Century Lock has that they're accusing Supra of using. So it's all over the place. You have to pay attention to what's going on the legal side, and where that can affect you as a director is you have to be very cautious about antitrust. And we've seen that years ago. It was brokers talking at a board meeting about the cost of advertising, and hey, in the newspaper, and let's just form or let's just go do this thing with ourselves, and it was agreement among competitors, which hurt somebody, and there was legal issues over that. So you can't. We've always been taught when we first start that you can't be talking about commissions, and we all understand that, and that's still the case. But what you might not realize is you've got to be careful at your board meetings or at any meetings that you're at of coming to agreements with other competitors, whether it's commission, whether it's a group boycott, whether it's I don't like that business model, or whatever it is. You've got to stay away from that in all of your discussions. When you're looking at policy, make sure that you're looking at policy that doesn't just alienate Zadel Realty. You're okay. We will cooperate everybody except for those that start with a Z. You can't do that. You've got to make sure you're avoiding that antitrust. And the world is changing with that. We're seeing the Department of Justice now, not only in our industry, but in a variety of industries, not just look at antitrust from is it the cheapest price for the consumer, but they're also looking at it like as well, it might be cheaper for the consumer, but if it eliminates other businesses from doing this, that could be antitrust as well. So an example of that outside of our industry is you have concerns with Amazon. If you're somebody independently trying to sell something on Amazon, is Amazon cutting you out? because they have it. So you've got to be careful on several different sides when it comes to antitrust. There's a lot of different business
Greg,
models. Yes.
I was just going to say, we do have one question.
Okay.
This one was probably from previous MLS. Do we foresee major mergers happening, such as local MLSs going away and a regional model coming forth?
Oh, good question. What I can tell you nationally is that what we're seeing is much more. It doesn't necessarily consolidation in the sense of entities consolidating, but the trend is for brokerages to be able to get all the information in a natural market area. And that oftentimes means whether it's data sharing, whether it's consolidation of the MLSs, whether it's one database and multiple front ends through different places. It could be a merger. There's not one direct way of doing it, but the push in the trend is really towards being able to make sure that wherever I'm doing business, I can have access to all the information. And if I'm doing business in Castle Rock, I want to be able to get information from Denver as well as Colorado Springs. If I'm in Colorado Springs, or if I'm just looking at something on the south end of Colorado Springs, I want to be able to get information from Pueblo and Colorado Springs. And there's always going to be somebody on the edge. And so the trends are to be able to access that, whichever way it works. Because you know, it's not, if it were Greg's world and I could wave the magic wand, I could set it up real easy, but it's not. And we have to get from where we are today to where we want to be, or where that vision is. And it's not always easy to do that, because there's stakeholders, there's kingdoms, there's all kinds of concerns about that. And as a director, you have to have that. You have to sit back and look at that big picture and see really what is best for your membership, what is best for the practitioners when it comes to all of these things. Hope that answers the question. Changing industry landscape, boy, you know, we're in a time now where you can have, you've got all kinds of different brokerage models. You've got, there was an article just a couple days ago about the annual reports from, oh geez, I forget the company that owns Coldwell Banker and Century 21 and all those, versus I think it was Compass, and they were showing the comparing their revenues and their expenses and their profits and losses. And with Wall Street now, you know, we've got companies, and it's not just in the real estate brokerage side of things, but all over. But there's companies that are losing millions and millions or hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and they're getting more money that are operating. And then you have folks like us, small offices, or you individual realtors that running your business. If you lose too much year after year, you're not going to be around very long. So we've got a different dynamic going on with money nowadays, and with the way Wall Street is coming into the business, and that's something to pay attention to. As a director on a board, whether it's the local or the state association, you've got to keep up with the trends and know what's going on, and this is a part of it. The non-realtor licensees, I spoke about that briefly a second ago. That's a new dynamic. If you have people that can be in the MLS but don't have to be without being a realtor member, that's something that you have to take into consideration as you're looking at governing your association. And then other players. If anybody's familiar with the commercial end of things, you got a company called CoStar that is kind of a de facto MLS for the commercial side. And those of us, or people that are members of CoStar, pay hundreds of dollars a month for something like that, because they're the only game in town. And they're taking big steps very big steps to get into the residential side of things. HomeSnap and I think Homes.com and other entities that they've acquired. These companies are multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar companies, publicly traded, that they've got eyes on our business, and that affects. You have to take those into account when you're thinking about the governance of your association or of your MLS. Any other questions or thoughts that before we get into the next subject here? Kind of on the background.
One other question.
Yes, go ahead.
They want to know, why do you think Wall Street is becoming more involved in the real estate environment than they have previously?
Well, it's been interesting because we had a little foray into this many years ago, probably 30 or so years ago, when Sears bought one of the brokerages, and I think a couple other Wall Street firms were getting into it. A lot of times, what you got two things going on. One is that there's a ton of money out there, and people are throwing money at just about anything. Who'd have ever thought people would be spending thousands or more dollars to buy pretend things in a pretend place? When you talk about the metaverse, there's just a lot of money out there. So that's one thing, is there's a lot of money looking for a place to invest. And then people look at outside the industry, look at real estate and say, gee, they're making a gazillion dollars because they make all this commission off of a house. And if our company could just get 50% of that, we'd be wealthy beyond our means. And so what they see as a goal out there, what's a possibility, is tremendous. Now, when you're inside the business, you realize it isn't that easy. We all compete with each other. We all work hard every day to try to get listings or find buyers' properties. And it's not just a matter of having a fancier computer program. But tech companies and Wall Street I don't think understand the weeds of our business. And plus there's been some entities that have made money off of referrals. That's always been a concern of, okay, you have the database and then you sell us the leads and get that referral fee. And that model has some validity in making money, if you've got a way to capture leads before they get to the agent, and if the agent's willing to pay a referral fee. I think you've seen companies with mixed results regarding acquiring properties, like the Zillow, the iBuyers, and that's been a little bit of almost a shell game, because at the Wall Street level, they look at what's your gross income and what's your gross sales. Well, when you're buying and selling houses, your gross income goes up a bunch if you buy a bunch more houses. So it looks like you're bringing in a lot of revenues. Your total revenue goes way up. The problem is if you're losing money on every one of those houses, like Zillow was doing, then you have to pull the plug on it, because you lose a couple $100 million in a quarter. You can't sustain that forever. But that's the basic reasons we're seeing people coming in, is that it looks very lucrative and there's money to spend. At some point, investors will realize, hey, if the company's not making the profit, no matter what industry it's in, it's going to be hard to sustain. Any other questions regarding the kind of the overview of the industry? Okay, so let's move on to a little more personal. So why are we here? You guys are all, and I'm going to try to see if I can see a few people that are on here. Give you an example of what I'm looking for. So why did I join the association? Why did I get involved in the Realtor Association? Not just join it. In my case, starting from day one back in 1980, when I first opened up my office here in Firestone, I would have been a member of the Greeley Association, because it was Weld County. And no offense to Greeley, but Firestone didn't have anything to do with that into the county. We were more geared towards the metro area. So I met with the person down at North Metro, or North Suburban Board of Realtors at the time, and we got the border changed through NAR and got this part of Weld County into that association. So it came from a very personal, hey, I want my office to be in this board, back when you had to be located in the board to join it. And then my involvement with the MLS came because I was complaining to Rosie, those of you that remember Rosie Leno, that my books got mailed to me by the MLS and they didn't take any pictures out here. I had to send in my own photos. So she said, well, get involved in the MLS. And so again, that was that personal level. Let me call Natalie, if you're, or yeah, what was your first foray into the Realtor Association?
Great question. So I've been involved, I think, since day one. I actually plugged into the Realtor Association for the education and learning. So there were a ton of classes. I was drinking from a fire hose as a new agent, and I thought, okay, I need to learn the most about this industry so that I can provide the best service for my clients. And then I realized the actual impact that the association was having, not only on our community, but within the industry itself as a whole for just practitioners and realtors. And I thought I want to be a part of this. So the rest is history.
Good. How about another person that's been in a business for a while, Jill up in Steamboat? What was your first thing that made you get involved with your association?
It's been so long, I don't even remember. I have to say that when I first became a realtor, I was a member of the Jeffco board. And when I moved up to Steamboat, I thought that I might be able to bring my very small amount of knowledge up to Steamboat. And that's all she wrote. I've been involved pretty much ever since. Good.
How about Derek? You've been around for a while too. Do you remember what your first reason for getting involved with the board was?
Basically, it was another board member asking me to get involved with the committee. And it started with that. And I really think that we get some of our best leaders from current leaders reaching out to people that they've just met or people who are new in the business and inviting them to get involved and find out what it's all about. Because otherwise, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of our members really don't know what we do or why we're here. So when you get them involved, and as Natalie says, start the fire hose, it's endless. And that's, like I say, once you're involved, you learn so much and you gain such an incredible insight as to why we're here and what we're doing. And your level of professionalism just skyrockets. So all those things kind of fall on you when you get involved, and here we are.
Good, thank you. I'll ask for one other person that's been for a while, Donna down in the Springs, and then I want to see if there's somebody that's new. Having a problem unmuting Donna. Is there somebody out, because I don't know everybody on the call, is there somebody that's been, that this is kind of their first, in the last year or so, first shot at getting involved in the association? Just go ahead.
It is. Yeah, it is for me, Greg.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so kind of like, I think that was Derek that spoke last, correct? I had another board, member asked me to be involved. I retired from teaching and got into real estate about 8 years ago. And so just kind of cruising along, doing my thing when somebody said, hey, would you think about being a director? So I did, and I really enjoyed being just a part of the inner workings and just being a little more in the know about how things work and what goes on in our area and statewide, and went to my first car convention this year. So that was fun. And but yeah, just had someone ask, and so decided to join, and just thought it might be a good way to collaborate with my peers and other colleagues. So
good. Donna, are you there able to unmute? Maybe, maybe not. There you go.
I can unmute.
Yeah. Why did you first start getting involved in the association?
I got voluntold.
Sounds like a
was
Pikes Peak
drug
thing.
along by another director. They just started inviting me to everything, dragging me along to everything, and got me involved on committees, and the rest is history. I guess I'm still here.
Good, good. Anybody else want to have a specific thing that caused you to get involved? Okay.
Hi, Greg. I can, this is Betsy Smith from Grand Junction, Colorado.
Oh, great.
And I got involved because I really felt like I needed to give back to the wonderful organization that I'd been a member of for several years. And I'm having a lot of fun. I'm learning a ton of things. Wish I'd gotten involved, 15 years earlier. So my encouragement now to, the newer agents is get involved. It's just so worth it.
Good, thanks. And Kevin, coming from a perspective of association exec.
We have opened things up, and that's why I suggest all the associations do. Remove as many obstacles as you possibly can. Most new members think that, oh gee, I've got a long ways to go, and et cetera, et cetera. But what we're finding is more new members bring with them a prior career that is extremely beneficial to service at even the board of directors level. We actually had a member run for the board of directors with more of an open format that had his real estate license about 2 years. But he's also has left the attorney business and has brought some great new perspective to the board of directors. So we actually have 3 board members right now with under a year's worth of experience. And it has been dynamic. It has been, we've all been grateful for their new perspective. And so again, I suggest associations open up and be very clear to membership that everybody at any level and any experience can join and start working in the association.
Great, thank you, thank you. So we all had our reasons for getting on and getting on the board or starting to get involved in it. The challenge becomes shifting from that very personal reason or that voluntold or whatever that is to starting to look at the big picture. Because as a director of the association, it's important that you step back and you take that big look at everything and looking at all those different aspects of the association, many of which you probably didn't even know existed or understood. When you're involved maybe with the governmental affairs side, because you don't like what your local city council is doing, and you get involved in that, you don't realize that there's this professional standards part, or there's this MLS part, or this education part, or the fun activities that the board does, or the marketing or networking, or whatever it happens to be. So you got to start looking at the big picture. When you come in with that small idea, and then your board's talking about, well, should we merge with this other board? Boy, that's a whole different dynamic and whole different picture. Or should we buy or sell a building? Or should we raise dues? Or should we send the president to the national convention? You got to start looking at the much bigger picture. And so that's a mindset that you have to have that shift and be able to set aside those little things and get to the bigger picture. The other piece of this is to be an effective director, as we talked a little bit before about knowing kind of what's going on, you've got to continue that knowledge and stay informed. And you can do that all kinds of ways. You can do that as a group. When I was chair of MetroList years ago, at our quarterly meetings, we would take a couple hours prior to the meeting and have guests come in and speak, whether it was somebody about a new business model, or if it was somebody that was maybe in a regulatory side, or even just a new technology thing that wasn't directly pertaining to real estate. Because the more informed your directors are, the better decisions you're going to make. If you're a local association in a community, like in Steamboat, maybe it'd be good to have the town manager in once in a while, or once a year, or once every couple of years to talk about what's going on in the community. Because it's not like in real estate, we get asked all the time. I used to tease about it that I needed to put in a new phone number about 1-900-ASK Greg, so I could get money for all these questions that come to me for people about the community. But you want to know what's going on. You can make better decisions as an association if you know that some big company is coming into town or whatever it might be. You might have, like I say, a business model. We had somebody from I forget the company at the time. This is probably 20 years ago, from Texas, with a new business model. It'd be great to have an association have somebody in to talk about a brokerage that's a non-realtor brokerage. Gee, might want to know why they don't want to belong to us. It doesn't mean that they're there to sell you on it, but if you understand why people go to non-realtor offices, maybe that's something that the board can think about and say, geez, if we offered these services, maybe they'd become part of our members, or maybe they don't even know that the good things we do. So think about that when you're about the staying informed. And then there's the great sources for individually. NAR has news feeds that you can get. You can set up however often you want it and what you want and what types of feeds you want, and they'll just come right to your email. Your local association, your state association, both have newsletters. You can stay informed with that. CAR does a good job with the legal bites. I'm guessing a lot of people watch those to pick up on things. NAR has a legal set of videos as well that are great. And then you've got some of the news media, Inman and RIS Media. I like to joke because after being on the advisory board on the MLS at the national level, I was there while the sausage was being made. I know what we said. I know what we came out with. And I read the Inman account of it, and I read the RIS Media account of it. And it's as if you had Fox News and MSNBC, because they're both talking about the same thing, but their views couldn't have been different. And it was very interesting because I know where the truth is, or what went on, and the spin one person has is here, the spin the other one has is here. And so you've got to take any news media like that with a grain of salt, because they are there to promote their own interests. You go to their conferences, you buy their subscriptions. T360 and Real Tech Trends and Wave Group are all other good sources of information. They're consultants for the most part. So you're also getting a point of view that is their point of view. And it's true also with NAR and with your state association. They're promoting their point of view on things. So the more variety you can get, the more rounded you are, and the better decisions you're going to make. Because if you understand these other perspectives, you can make better decisions because you're more likely to understand where some people are going to be coming from. Because none of us have every perspective. That's why we have a bunch of people on a board to bring all these other perspectives. But the more you understand personally, the easier it is to make better decisions that you're more understanding of that diversity. Let's see here. Any questions or thoughts on that? Thank you for those of you that I called on. I appreciate you getting involved in that. So now we're going to talk about the board that you're serving on, and this was where I came up with the name of the book your director had. It's back when I was first starting. I don't know if it was probably Oliver or some of the other folks back then talked about the hat and somewhere along the line, the analogy came up about what hat are you wearing at the board? And it's absolutely critical to think about that seat that you're sitting on at the association or at that, whatever that board of directors is. You're put on that board or elected to that board for a variety of reasons. If it's a CAR association director, you're appointed most likely by your local association. That doesn't mean that you're voting for the local association. The local association is who appointed you to be on that board. You're there on the CAR board of directors. We have, in some cases at NAR or at the MLSs and maybe at the associations, you have positions that are limited to like large brokers. We want a large broker perspective. So they're sitting on that board. Well, they're not voting the Coldwell Banker position or the whatever company position. You're there to represent that association. And at times that can have conflicts, so to speak, with where you're coming from. If I'm a very large broker and we've got great in-house legal counsel, and that we see that as a competitive advantage over Zadel Realty that doesn't have its own attorney, and they're a CAR director, they might be saying, well, geez, maybe that legal hotline, it sure doesn't benefit my company. Let's get rid of it. Rather than looking at the entirety of the CAR membership and saying, is the legal hotline of value? And so when you're sitting at that seat, that's who you're representing. And that's the lens you have to make those decisions through. Now you come with the perspective of that company or that local association or those personal experiences. And you bring that perspective, and that's an important perspective to bring into the discussions. And it may be that is the best thing for CAR, happens to be the same as it was for the association or was a brokerage, but that's coincidental. You've got to look at what's the best for the place that you're doing the voting for. Makes sense to everybody? It's I know it's gets difficult sometimes, but and I've seen cases where we had one on Metrolist board where the board that appointed a person didn't like the decision that was made at the MLS, and that person was replaced at the next meeting. And that's the board's prerogative. They can, if a board appoints somebody to another board and they don't like what's going on, they can remove that person. It's unfortunate that there isn't understanding of that, but it can happen. But that you can't be. It's not a situation where if I'm appointed by DMAR to be a NAR director, that I don't go to DMAR every time NAR is taking a vote and say, DMAR, what do you want to do? I come with a DMAR perspective, but I vote what's best for NAR when if I'm sitting at that NAR board of directors committee meeting. And that might not be what the local association wanted, but it's what I feel sitting there is best for the National Association. Doesn't mean I'm going to rubber stamp things or vote against my association, but you just got to remember that's who you are there. That's the hat you're wearing. So you have all these different ones. Sometimes it's a committee, and the committee, we'll get into this later when we're talking about voting, but if you're on a committee and the committee makes a decision, then that's the decision you're bringing forth. You were a part of that. When you're on a board and the board makes a decision, then that's the decision you're bringing forth. And so sometimes we have all these different things, our personal hats, our friends' hats. My buddy wants this because of whatever reason, or I really like, since the state and NAR have gone to electronic voting. so that you can vote your conscience. And it's not as much of a intimidation factor of, okay, Greg and Derek stand up and vote this way, so we better vote that way. Or I voted this way, so you're going to make sure you vote the opposite way. You don't be intimidated or go with the flow. Vote your conscience. It's and that's, we all come from different places and have different thoughts. It doesn't mean that we're wrong for having that discussion or for voting our own way. Any questions on that about loyalty? I guess I kind of went into this already. You're at a car meeting. You're also a local association. What hat are you wearing? You're wearing your car. It's whatever meeting you're in. You know, look around the room. That's whose interest you're looking for. Is that entity, that board of directors. And you'll get into some tough things. I mentioned a couple already, but you know, I've seen it at the state level where you're voting on something that could be real difficult for some area. One of the things I remember, we had a bill that we were talking about supporting at the state level for highways. Well, it included, I can't remember if it included more money outside of the metro area or inside of the metro area. And it doesn't matter, because the point is the same. If it's good for the state, and that's what you feel that it's better for the state, then you vote for it, even though your area might get less money than a different area. And sometimes you get to where a board, especially as you get bigger, they decide that they can't make a decision. And that's okay too, as long as you have a good constructive dialogue. You know, NER forever, or at least for as long as I've been involved, hasn't endorsed a candidate for president because they didn't feel that was something that they could do. At the state level, we've endorsed gubernatorial candidates, and I remember being involved where we knew that it was likely that the gubernatorial candidate that the state was endorsing wasn't going to win, but it was the person that supported property rights and looked at real estate better than the other person. And so sometimes you have those conflicts, or the state is voting for a candidate that's very good on property rights, but you don't like their personal stance on abortion. So, and that's probably going to be the case 50% of the time, because that's a very divisive issue. But you're looking at it through the lens of what's best for the association. And in that case, property rights is what we're looking at, not gun control or abortion or something else that doesn't have direct correlation with property. This is an interesting one that seems to come up almost every time we have an idea about raising the dues. Because at CAR or at NER, when you raise those dues, the locals, as I talked about at the very beginning, get to be the bearer of the bad news to their members and say, hey, your dues are going up, even though we didn't do it at the local level. Or we are asking for more money at the local level, and then CAR or NER piles on, and it doesn't feel so good. So how do you handle that? Your board just said, hey, I've got, we're raising we need to raise our dues, and CR just raised theirs $10, and NER just raised theirs $10. What are you going to do? Well, if you're sitting at the CR board of directors, you've got to decide what's best for CAR. Now, in your discussion or in your thought process, you do keep it in mind that, okay, if we raise our dues and the local association wants to raise theirs as well, that's going to make it a double whammy for them. And that's true. And then you decide, is that still the best thing for CAR? Okay, we can't control when the locals raise their dues. The CAR dues are the same for all the associations. So if South Metro raised theirs by $10 and DMARS were the same, but Carr raised it $10, well, they're still only $10 apart, and they would have been $10 even if CAR didn't raise their dues. So it just depends upon, you got to think that through as to what's best. Is it the right time because people are going out of business? Is it the right time? There's all kinds of discussion when it comes into that. But again, keep in mind what's best for that board that you're sitting on. Take those other considerations into mind. And maybe there's a better time to do it. Maybe there's not. Maybe there's a different way. Maybe if you're pushing to offer more services, or you want to cut back on services to keep them down, or whatever it might be. Keep that in mind. But the point of it is just to stick with the board that you're on. Anybody have an example of where they've had a real difficult time with that type of a process? If you want to raise your hand or put it in the chat, or we can just move on. Okay. Okay, long-term goals. We talked about that briefly before, but this gets into a little more of running the organization. And we'll, after a bit here, we're going to talk about policy governance. But as a board, your job is to look at the long term, not the local details on a daily basis. If your board has if you're a volunteer and your board has an office for you at their board office, get out of there. Don't do that. The board shouldn't do that. You're not there to run, unless you don't have any staff, I suppose. But I think now everybody has professional staff. You're not there to run the day-to-day business as much as you like to. And the difficulty for all of us is that we like to talk about or get involved with what we understand. And as business people, we all understand the day-to-day stuff because we do that. You know where, go to Costco or Staples or wherever you buy the best copier paper, and you can get that deal, or you know what to do with the office supplies. Well, the last thing a director should be doing is telling the association where to get their copy paper, or where to get whose phone system they should be using. That's the staff's job. That's not the board of directors. The board of directors' job should be to say, our long-term goal is to have customer service available for these hours, or it's to be able to have these resources available to our membership. It's up to the staff to decide how they're going to get that done. But we tend to want to talk about it because we know it and we understand it. That's why budgets are oftentimes difficult for directors, because we don't deal with that on a daily basis. Very few realtors have a budget in their own business, and they don't see these kind of numbers like we do when we're sitting on a board. And so it's an uncomfortable thing. It's amazed me because I see, a half an hour discussion on the association buying a copier and 2 minutes to pass a multi-million-dollar budget, because there's no discussion. People don't get that stuff. So really try to concentrate on the long-term goals, the big picture stuff, rather than those details. Even though you're comfortable with the details, look beyond that. So this is all under that why you're here, the benefits. My gosh, there's, and some of the people mentioned when I asked why you wanted to be involved in the board, there are a whole lot of benefits in two areas. One is the industry. You can sit here and be involved in an association and raise the bar, raise the tide for all of us. You can come up with maybe you're involved in the forms committee, and you get us a better contract to use. Maybe you're involved in the political side of things, and you help stop a bad law or pass a good law that helps everybody with their property rights. you're involved in the MLS and you make that marketplace better. Whatever you're involved in education, and you actually help raise the bar to get more realtors better educated. So there's this great sense of being involved in helping our industry be better than when you left it. And that's a great thing, is if you can sit on a board and put in place policies and help it out that makes it better than when you started. If you can leave it a little bit better, that's a great personal benefit to it. I always used to joke with Pat Bybee when I was chairman of Metrolist for so many years. And then when I stopped, I was a little upset the next day because the MLS system still functioned. I was hoping that it'd go down for just a minute, just so I could think I was a little more important than I was. But you just try to leave it a little bit better. So that's the benefit as a group. Personal benefits. There's a ton of personal growth. You know, somebody mentioned, hey, I'd like to know what's going on. And being involved in the board, you're getting that information firsthand. That's why a lot of us that have been doing this for a long time have a hard time. That's one of the reasons we have a hard time getting away from it, because we still want to know, we want to hear what's happening, what's coming up, what's going to be coming down the pike. And there's ways of doing that without having to be on the board forever, you know, but that's one of the things that you really like to be in the know and what's happening, because that's beneficial not only for your decision making on the association, on the board, but also in your personal business. If you see where things are changing and you think, okay, well, how am I going to handle that when I'm dealing with my customers and clients? And it's a great reminder. It's also good to keep you out of trouble. You know, when you're sitting on a board and you hear about these issues with discrimination, with appraisers being discriminatory or whatever it is, you bring that back and you think about, okay, am I doing things right in my business to where I don't end up being the case they talk about? You know, you can help avoid issues just by getting that personal knowledge of what's going on in the industry. Friendships, you know, I didn't believe that when I was first getting involved in this. I don't know anybody. You develop some very good friendships. You know, some of them are nice, are good business friendships or realtor friendships. Some of them become very personal and close friends. But you get to meet a lot of really amazing people. I never cease to be amazed about the different people and the different personalities. And as you get to know people, especially if your board has a planning session where maybe you're together all day or even doing an event, there's people that have some drive. I don't know if Kay Watson is on this call, but I'll never forget. We had a state event, and she was in and we were doing something. I think we were paddling up down a river, and boy, she became the captain of that ship and was getting after all of us. And it's a cool thing. You see all these personalities. Saw somebody else that sat down at a piano and started playing amazingly, that I would have no clue that they did that. So we got you get a lot of neat personal growth out of this. And you learn all kinds of stuff. Oh my gosh, you know, I just as an example, when I first started, I thought, oh, you know, being a small broker has these benefits, but boy, it must be nice to be I was in the car with a Remax broker that owned an office, and we were driving someplace, and I said, boy, it must be nice when you know every month what you have coming in, because you get desk fees. And he turned to me and says, well, that's if you collect those desk fees. Because I never thought about that, side of things. And I sat at another meeting where I was in Chicago, and this gentleman asked me, tell me about your office. And I told him I got, one office with 4 or 5 people, small office. And I said, how about you? And 8,000 people over 5 states. And so it's a whole different world, but that's exposure that I would have never gotten sitting here in my office in Firestone. There's just exposure to attorneys, there's exposure to accountants or all these professionals that this industry and being involved in the industry gets you so much that you'd have never gotten otherwise. Anybody else have any examples of things like that? Advantages, things that you've had, especially your experienced folks? Well, make me start calling. How about Karen? I saw Karen there earlier. She's still there?
I'm still here.
What's surprised you about something that you've gotten in personally out of all this?
I was thinking about that, Greg. I don't know if there's been necessarily surprises, but maybe. You talk about retreats. I think getting to know people beyond the real estate business, sometimes there are surprises there. Became really, really good friends, am good friends with Dennis Johnson. And that would have been somebody that, in my mind, he being a car president early in my career, that he would be hands off. Like, you know, I was just a brand new broker, and today we're very good friends. I also remember the time you and I drove up to state meetings and got to know each other. An amazing wealth of relationships in this group. Derek introduced me to yards at the Bee. I don't know if that was good or bad, but just you look locally, the friendships, the relationships, you look statewide, you look nationally. And in today's marketplace, if you haven't realized, it's these relationships that will get us through the difficult markets and the good markets. Because when we need help or encouragement or direction, this group of people you can call on.
Yeah.
So that's what I'd share.
That's great. I appreciate you sharing that. And that brings up a point too with getting to know people. I had one person in my office a couple of years ago had, in a multiple offer situation, the listing agent said that one of the deciding factors, and it was probably, I'm guessing the dollars were the same, because I don't think this would be a total deciding factor, but something that put it over the edge is that agent knew me from CAR and from the association. And so they gave the associate in my office a benefit there because it's a known commodity. And that's important in our business. You know, when you think about it, it's nice when you're dealing with an agent that you dealt with before, because even if they weren't that great, you know what to expect. It's nice when then it's when I remember having a transaction with Jolan, and she was an extremely detail oriented person. If you've ever had a transaction with her, every dot, every cross T, and so I took it as a challenge to try not to have her pick anything apart, because I knew her and she's going to do a great job, but it was also a known commodity. And that's, I'm going to get off on a tangent here, but being a known commodity is not just important in our business side, but it's important if you're wanting to get positions, especially as you move up the ladder. Like NAR, I tell people it's not who you know at NAR, it's who knows of you. And because when you're sitting there and you've got these people from all over the country, and there's some people that you know or you know about, it's just a personal tendency to choose what is a known commodity versus the unknown. We all, if we're driving through wherever, we're all more likely to stop at the brand name restaurant than we are to stop at the local mom and pop spot. Because even though we know that hamburger is going to be whatever it is, and it might not be as good as the local place, we know what it is. And so we tend as people to go for that known commodity rather than the unknown. So as much as you can network with people and become known, the easier it is to get other appointments and to kind of move up in an organization.
Greg,
Yes,
Margie
Marjorie.
Genova.
Yeah.
another part of it is as you're on different boards and meeting a lot of people from around the country, how similar that we really are. I mean, maybe in your local board, your average price might be 200, and you talk to somebody from California and they can't believe that you did, 15 transactions because they did 2 and did twice the, volume that you did. But really, when you sit on a lot of committees and boards across the country, we're all very similar, actually.
Yeah.
Like you said, with the someone that, has 8,000 members in their board versus 5 or in their office.
Mhm.
So it is kind of cool, and to do referrals. And when your client says, well, do you know that person? Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I do know them.
Yeah, and getting to know referrals in other states, other cities.
Right.
By far, the most referrals I get are from people within the state of Colorado. Nobody picks out Frederick or Firestone to when they're looking at a map from California. But the local people, or the more in-state type people, will sure get referrals that way. And that's another benefit that we hadn't talked about is getting referrals, even within your own association. You can, if I'm looking for a property manager, then I might have met somebody that sits on the association board and talk to them about that.
Exactly.
When you talk about differences, we talk about that a lot when we're dealing with national MLS policy, because everybody says they're unique. Every MLS we're different than anybody else. And the reality is you're probably 95+% the same. We've all got some differences on the fringes. Maybe it's fields or maybe it's local business issues, but we're very much the same across the association. The other thing that somebody spoke on or mentioned a minute ago that I wanted to clarify or bring up, as far as Karen talking about Dennis wondering if he's approachable. Back when I was state president and Amy was president-elect or chair-elect, we were amazed how few people would come up and talk to us in the hallways. And it was always, you'd finally talk to someone, well, we wanted to bring this up, but we didn't want to bother you. And nobody wants to bother those people in those offices because they think they're not approachable, or they're not, we're the same as anybody else. We sell houses for a living. We do the same. And it's, if you see those people, don't be afraid to and Natalie may or may not like this if I tell people to approach her all the time next year, but
I like it. Please do. Yes, I welcome it. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, because it is important. They're not, and most of the time when I was chairman of the board or president, especially a bigger organization like CAR, you'd want to talk to people and get their opinions, but nobody would come up to you. Nobody would approach you. And you don't want to also look like the other way of me going out to you and making you think that I'm pressuring you to vote one way or the other, because that's not the case. So treat those officers as you treat the person sitting next to you. They're still approachable. They're still workable. They want to know what your thoughts are. They're not there to steamroll something. Let's see, where was I on? Learn about the organization. So the first thing and then maybe I'll go another, we'll do this slide and then we'll take a break so everybody can have a 5-minute break or something. So learning about the organization. Easiest way to learn about what's going on is follow the money. It's very simple. And it takes work though. So get a copy of the budget. If you're getting on your local association, ask your AE or if the AE has a finance person, ask if you can have a little bit of their time, take a half an hour and have them sit down with you with the money and the budget and take a look at it. And that was one of the real motivating factors for me to write the book in the first place, was our school district was going broke because they were spending more money every year than they were taking in. And so look at trends. When you're looking at the budget, look at what's being spent compared to what was being budgeted. and look for variations there and ask questions as to why those variations existed. So in this last year, if you probably looked at most association budgets, they were profitable, and it might have been because they were below budget on travel. Well, nobody traveled, so it's understandable. But that doesn't mean that in 2022 or 2023 you can axe the travel budget, because we may be back to that travel. We'll likely be back to that travel. Or why is something either spent more of or spent less of? It's pretty obvious maybe on the income side. If you're expecting so much money coming in affiliate dues and you have half that much, well, why is that? Are we losing affiliates? Are we not renewing them? What's going on with that? Or is it a timing issue? When we're spending money, are we spending more? Did we spend more money? This is, and nobody takes anything personal here. Did we spend more money on the convention than we thought we should, or than we budgeted? Or if and with some things, convention's kind of a good example for that. If we took in less revenue, are we going to have corresponding less expenses? Or if we took in less revenue, are our expenses higher? And those are the kind of questions to ask to see if you want to know what's going on within the organization. And as a director, part of your legal responsibilities is you're a custodian of the funds of the association. So you need to be informed on it. Again, doesn't mean you're going to be the person cutting the checks or doing the books, but you need to have a basic understanding of where the money's going and whether or not you're managing those funds correctly. That's also how you can evaluate your association executive, because as the board is the employer of the exec, and part of that evaluation is financial. And if you don't ask questions or understand the financial information, are you doing a good job evaluating that person or evaluating individual programs? And as a director, you want to know, if we're going to spend some more money, do we have that money? And where is it coming from? And again, have that understanding. So it's important to do. And like I say, take a few minutes and if the whole board is unsure about it, I've had boards where we sit down and take some time as an entire board and have the finance person explain this dashboard or these financial statements. A lot of times it's easier for the association directors to look at a basic dashboard or some basic figures rather than 8 pages of line items. So do what's understandable and what's workable, but yet gives you enough detail to do your due diligence and know what's going on. To also learn about the organization, participate in events. Kind of hard to vote on whether or not the convention is a good thing if you never go, or whether Realtor Day at the Capitol or whatever it might be. So participate in that, and then talk to the members. As a director, and you don't have to go up to somebody and say, "Hey, I'm a director. I want your opinion on this, so I know how to vote." Just visit with them at the event. Talk to them what's going on. Talk to them in your office. Talk to members that aren't on the board. You get a variety of people that you'll run into. Maybe even you're chit-chatting, waiting for the buyers and sellers to show up at a closing. You talk to the other agent because you just met them for the first time at the closing, probably. So keep that stuff in mind. Any questions about that? Thoughts? Okay, let's take a break for a few minutes, and we'll restart. What time is it? How about 10:55? 5 minutes. That good for everybody? Okay, you can, if you want to unmute and visit with each other, that's perfectly fine. But we'll take a few minutes and then come right back. Okay, we'll get started here in about 30 seconds. So come on back. Okay, so this part, we're going to now go to the little bit about policy governance. So a few years ago, well, I don't know how many years ago now, 10 years ago, whatever it's been, CAR adopted policy governance. And I'm guessing that a lot of your local associations have also adopted a policy governance type of structure. And this isn't going to be a class on policy governance. I'm not going to get into it in great detail, but just to give you some basic overviews of policy governance. And it's really kind of a formal way of doing what you should be doing as a board of directors anyway. And the idea behind policy governance is a lot like our listing contracts. So if you think about your listing contract, in essence, on the listing contract, you're the staff and the seller is the board of directors. And the seller is saying, sell my property for this price, and these are the inclusions, and do it within the legal structure of the law. And you've got this much time to do it. As the realtor, then I've got these goals that have been set by the seller. And now I'm in charge of doing the details. I can fill out the MLS form. I can do the brochures, whatever colors I want. I don't have to go to the seller to ask, how do you like, is this brochure okay? Do you want to fix this or do that? Do you want to make the brochures? I can put the sign where I want to put the sign. I do all that work and bring them a contract and say, here, I did my work. So as a board of directors for the association, you set the goals. We want to have these general events, and we want to have them within this budget, or we're willing to subsidize this event for this much money, or whatever it might be. You give that general structure and those general goals to the staff, and then it's up to the staff to carry that out. You're not deciding should they be yellow or blue tablecloths. Now, maybe the staff has a committee, or there's a committee that does a lot of the work on something, but that general direction is what's set forth by the board. And so you have these layers of limitations. You say, do it within these constraints. And if at times you don't like the constraints, if they're too tight and the staff needs more room to do things, you bring back the guardrails. If it's, hey, we need more control on this particular issue, then you tighten those guardrails a bit. If you've had, when an association has had an incident in the past that was a negative type of incident, then they're probably going to have tighter guardrails on that, at least for a time. Then they might loosen them as they gain trust again. It's kind of like your kids, you say, okay, be back by whatever. And then it's okay, but also don't go over to this guy's house, or don't do this. You put those limitations on it, but you give them that freedom within those limitations. So that's your basic thoughts on policy governance, and it's not always the easiest thing, because sometimes we get caught up in doing the little stuff, but be careful and try not to get caught up in that. Any questions on that before we move on? Okay, so fiduciary duties, this is almost like the the legal screen on the slides. You know, as a director, you're responsible. You've got a responsibility of care, loyalty, accounting, confidentiality. And we'll get into confidentiality a little more later. But I know I always joke that it's amazing how it seems like somebody knows about what went on in the meeting before the meeting was over. And today that's even more so because of texting and social media. You gotta have a discussion at each meeting or about individual topics to know what you can say and what you can't say. Don't be speaking out of school. And it's amazing how our industry, part of the difficulty with us all having friends and acquaintances that we trust within this industry is that we want to talk to those friends and acquaintances. And so I say something to one person, she says something to another person, he says something to another person, and we say these things in confidence because we know we can trust that person. Well, as it goes around the loop and ends up at the end, all of a sudden, somebody that I would have never wanted to hear that I told this one person is being told that. And so you've got to be very careful about confidences and keeping that information. Plus, if your discussion at a board meeting or at a committee meeting or a planning meeting, if it's not a safe space to talk openly, you're not going to get open conversation. Because sometimes you have to even discuss what could be looked at as absurd if it's taken out of context in order to come up with the right decision. So if I'm quoted as saying something wacko because I said it and it was in the context of a conversation that we were having, but it's taken out of context, all of a sudden that can be pretty bad. You can also have issues where it can be legal issues. Back in the day when we were doing board of choice and we were changing how our MLS system functioned from going to the boards as a wholesaler to the brokers, we went direct to the brokers and got rid of the middleman, so to speak. I was with North Metro and ended up being quoted in the DMAR minutes of one of their meetings of something that I didn't say. You know, somebody said, well, Greg Zadel said this, and ended up where it almost had to get legal counsel to defend that. So you got to be careful about speaking out of school. Obedience, that's just staying within the guidelines or the guardrails of what your association has. You know, if you're doing things by policy, that's great. If you're operating outside of that, you got a problem. And make sure that, and if you think the board is going outside of that or staff is going outside of that, bring it up and discuss it. Don't be afraid to broach the tough topics because somebody else is probably thinking the same thing. So bring it up. Sometimes people get hesitant because they don't want to say something out loud and then they wish they would have, but just bring it up and ask the question. So working with staff. We as people only function well if we only have one boss. If you have more than one boss, it becomes dysfunctional because who are you responsible to? And this can happen very easily within an association. So first think about your hierarchy. Your board of directors, well, you have your membership, then they elect the board to handle the business. The board then, as a group, has probably a chairman that's the mouthpiece, so to speak, of the board. But they're doing the board's, whatever the board says is what the president or chairman takes forth. Your chief executive officer, an AE or CEO, whatever your term is in your association, is the top person of the staff. And they're getting their overall directions from the board of directors, probably through, in some cases, the chairman, or because it's hard for 12 people to talk to them at once. So again, that chairman is speaking with that one voice to the CEO. That CEO then is delegating within his or her staff below them. And where we end up with the problem with one boss is an example being potentially being with Carr. So you have Abby as the member services chair. So the board has these divisions, and one of those is member services, that they have a person from the leadership council overseeing those items. Well, that member services chair, Abby, is working with was it Lisa and Holly on the staff under Lisa, and then Holly under Lisa, and their actual boss is Tyrone. So if you're not careful, the interaction between Abby and, say, Lisa, or make it Holly, can interfere with Holly's relationship with her direct supervisor, Lisa, or their boss, Tyrone. So it becomes paramount that you take care with that and keep things within that reason. So, or within those confines of what's supposed to be happening, and not, okay, Holly, I want you to go out and do this whole new project. And all of a sudden she's doing something because Abby's on the board or on the leadership council, or it's Natalie as the chair-elect says, boy, we'd like this to be done. And Holly runs off and does it because she's, thinks it's a good idea too, or being nice to people. And then she gets evaluated by Lisa or Ty saying, well, why aren't you getting your work done? So you've got to be careful as volunteers not to put the staff in a position where they feel that they have more than one boss. And for the association people that are out there, please have your staff remind us of that. Because as volunteers, we don't always remember those kind of things. So have the staff remind us if we're stepping out of bounds and putting too much on somebody. Volunteers really try to be careful with that, because we do it. I don't think people do it maliciously, but it's in the heat of it. Hey, we could get this done, and let's just do this. And all of a sudden there's this big thing that they're not authorized in essence by their boss to do. So be very aware of that and careful with that. Any questions or comments on that?
Well, Greg, it's Marge again. And
Yes, Marge.
sometimes some of that needs to be voted on by the board. I mean, the chairman might think this is a great idea, but it probably should be voted on by the entire board.
Yeah,
not just his idea or her idea.
That's a great reminder, and that's true with a whole bunch of stuff. It's where the temptation gets difficult is when you're that chair of that committee, or the chair of the organization, the president of the organization, or the division VP. It's very easy to get caught up in that and believe that you understand what the board wants or what the committee wants, but maybe you don't have that authorization to do that. And so it always makes me cringe when I get appointed to a chairmanship or whatever, and somebody says, well, what are you going to do in your year? Well, hey, I might be conducting the meeting, but it's not my year. It's the association. It happens to be the year that I'm running the meeting, but it's not Greg's year. It's not, okay, I want to have this, and it ain't that. I'm running the meeting, but it's the group that decides, it's the board that decides what we're doing, or the strategic plan that guides us if we have that in place, or the policy for the committee, or whatever that is. I just get the honor of running the meeting and being the face of it, so to speak, but it's not Greg's year. Treating the staff as colleagues. They're not your subordinates. We're not their subordinates. It's a collegial, respectful, equal type of thing. Yes, the board is the staff's boss. that one person's boss. But the more you respect that person and have mutual respect and working together is critical. And as a chair of a committee or as a person that's working directly with the staff, whichever staff member it is, make sure you have a discussion up front. Set your expectations both ways. It's a two-way street. You shouldn't be telling the staff to go get your laundry, and the staff shouldn't be just doing whatever they want to do towards you. It's keep it professional and set those expectations. Like when you're dealing with a buyer, if you tell, or a buyer or seller, if you tell people, hey, I'm available until this time, and then my phone's shut off, and you set that up front, it's not a problem. So have those discussions with the staff member that you're working closely with. Have an idea about how you can speak freely with each other. You've got to have people that'll tell you that, maybe you're not going down the right track. And you've got to have that ability to correct, to be corrected as a volunteer if you misspeak, and how you want that to happen. Hey, if I say something wrong to the meeting, do I want you to just stop me right there, or to pass me a note, or tell me afterwards, or what? Have that discussion up front, so that they feel that they've got the ability, if there is a problem, to tell you there's a problem, and that you've got the feeling like they're not trying to embarrass you or hurt you for some reason. So have those discussions up front about speaking freely, about, and all of us are different. We all remember things differently, or things that remind us of something. We all do that differently. I joke that, somebody could tell me something yesterday about how weird I looked, and I wouldn't even remember today, and I wouldn't pay any attention to it. Other people will remember that for 30 years. And that's just differences in different people. I shouldn't have to say it, but you got to pay attention to it, is avoid harassment when you're dealing with, and this is with other directors or with staff, and especially with staff where it can appear to be a subordinate or staff person. So that can be, and we're not just talking sexual harassment or bad jokes or things like that, but it can just be being a bully. Be careful with that kind of stuff. And your board will have policy, or if they don't, you need to have it, but there should be policy in place that talks about how to handle that. If somebody's uncomfortable in a situation, who do they go to? As a director, if you're uncomfortable with something that staff or another director told you, the chain of command is probably to go to the chairman of the board. Or if that's the person that's the issue, maybe then it's the vice chair, and have that discussion. If somebody from staff, they go up their chain of command with the staff, and that's brought to probably the chairman or the leadership council or whoever it is. But obviously avoid that type of situation. Again, you're like we talked about with policy governance, you're giving them the goals, and here's the results we want within these limitations. You figure out the details, and don't meddle in their day-to-day work if it's within what you told them to do as a board or as a committee or as the person in charge. Chain of command, that's what I was talking about with the different levels. If you think, hey, we don't have enough resources for this person to do that, you've got to include Ty or whoever their bosses are into that discussion. And then you have the same responsibilities when it comes to outside professionals. A board's going to have a legal counsel, they're going to have a tax counsel or an auditor. They may have other professionals come in from time to time, and again, treat them respectfully, listen to their advice. It's still the board's decision. You shouldn't have a board that all the decisions are made by the attorney. You want to take into account the attorney's opinion. That's what you're having them do. But it doesn't mean that they're the person running the organization. It's still the board. And that's a difficult situation, because you have to start to weigh legal risk versus the benefits of doing something. We had this discussion years ago before we had carbs about, gee, should the association endorse anybody? Well, there's a legal risk there. If something goes wrong with that endorsement, is the association in a vulnerable position? Well, then you decide, okay, maybe the rewards outweigh that risk. And so you can make those decisions. But listen to those outside professionals, seek their guidance, but it's still your job. It's not, you can't just say, well, the attorney said we had to do it this way, so we did it that way. If you decide to go along with the advice, that's fine. Or if you go different than that, you ought to understand why, but don't use that as a crutch. Bringing in your replacement. This kind of circles back to what we talked about earlier. You want to have groom somebody or ask somebody to come in and take your place. None of us should be here in that same spot forever. Sometimes we get recycled, and that's okay. Especially when you're talking about smaller organizations and you come back with a different perspective than maybe you had 10 years earlier. But ask people to be involved. It's amazing how many people will be involved if you ask. And part of that ask needs to be specific. If you say, hey, what really like to have you on this committee, it's this 2 meetings and then you're done. Or it's this time each month, or whatever it is, give them an honest evaluation about it and of what it's going to be and what it's going to take, but ask those folks. Be willing to vote yourself out of a job. If the best thing to do with your organization is to merge it into another one, if that's the best for your members, you got to be willing to do that. CAR just a few years ago went from 3 charitable entities into 1. So those people were willing to, in essence, vote themselves out of a job because it was better for the membership to do that. And that is hard to do. It's hard for people to do that. But if it's the best thing for the hat you're wearing, then do it. Because if you're voting to merge, it's the best for your membership. It might not be the best for the legal entity because it's going away, but the members that make up that entity, if it's best for them, then that's what you should do. Bringing in your replacement also brings in new ideas. I think Kevin mentioned that they've got a couple people that are just in the business for a couple of years. That is fantastic because it brings in a different perspective. Those of us that have been around longer might be more into what we know. And so you want to have those different perspectives. Does your board of directors look like you and your customers? And I don't know if I know Derek's on from DMAR. I don't know if any of the DMAR directors or officers are on. But Derek, if you could just give a quick summary of how DMAR did its diversity within the board of directors. Would you mind talking about that for just a second?
Diversity, are you talking, Greg, are you talking from the perspective of the committee or diversity from bringing in people onto the board?
The people on the board.
Got it. Several years ago, DMAR was one of the first boards in the nation to bring on a representative representing, at the time it was CAREP, the Colorado Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals. And they also brought on a rep from NARAB, National Association of Real Estate Brokers, in hopes of starting to diversify the board and what it looked like. And so they actually added 2 voting positions at that time. I think this was about 2007, 2008, when they were still Denver Board of Realtors. And that basically was done in order to, again, attract people of all races and creeds to the board in hopes of really making it reflect more of what the membership was looking like. So that's how that started. As a matter of fact, this week, they're voting to add 2 more voting positions to the board. One for ARIA the Asian Real Estate Association of America, and then one for the Alliance, which is the LGBTQ Association. So they would then have 4 voting seats at the board. Again, looking at what NAR has done, NAR has done to promote diversity and the groups that NAR is working with, it lines up with those associations. So
Thank you.
So-
Thank you, Derek.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's an example of how you can do that. You could do it informally and just try to recruit people from different things, or you can do it like DMAR has done and have a formal seat that comes from different organizations. It's also important to have diversity in office type, in business model, in size of office, experience, whether it's a newer agent or an older agent, a more experienced agent. Also between broker associates and brokers. If you have a board of all associates, they're looking at it through a different lens than if it's a board of all brokers. So again, the more diverse in all kinds of ways that board can be, men and women, young and old, all that kind of stuff, the better off you are, because you're bringing in all these perspectives. It doesn't mean that they're voting for a certain group. I don't go back and say, okay, I've got to ask all the little brokers how I should vote. I need to vote what's best for that organization that I'm sitting there at. But I bring in a perspective of a small broker. You can bring in a perspective from a different alliance and bring that into the room to make sure that point of view is heard. And it doesn't mean, we might have to have a board of 100 people if you wanted, or 1,000 people to try to get complete diversity. But it doesn't mean you have to do that. It's helping you understand those points of views. And even if you don't have somebody, if you had a board that didn't have a big broker on, you better be at least thinking about what those big brokers would be looking for, or seeking out their thoughts or their opinions. Or if a different group is represented, be thinking about those when you're deliberating about a subject. Okay, so let's get into, I realize we're got about 40 minutes left. Let's get into the meetings. And I want to talk a little bit about running a meeting. And I like to equate a meeting like a concert. So if you sit back and think about a concert, and maybe this is having 2 daughters in band class, so going to everything from elementary school to college concerts, you get a lot of variety. And I think I've sat in meetings that had just as much variety of direction as the concerts did. So what you have in a concert is you have a whole group of various people with various opinions or instruments, and you bring them together and you get something that's really good because they're all participating. You're bringing forth things. So as the chairman of that meeting, whether it's a committee or a board or a task force or whatever it is, you want to conduct that meeting like the conductor would at a concert. And so you start out thinking, okay, if I'm running the meeting, how do we want the layout? Is it where we have good communications? Do I want to have a seating chart where I put people in certain places? Do I want to set the expectations for that meeting? What are we going to accomplish? The time, it's important to start and stop when you say you're going to start and stop. Getting people advanced materials, making sure they have information that they can come to the meeting prepared. Who's going to be invited to that meeting? Do we need the accountant there? Do we need the attorney there? Do we need the committee chair there? At a lot of the meetings I've been involved in at the local level, the local association, even back in the North Suburban days, would have their CAR directors and their MLS directors. And if they had an NAR director, they would have them at their meetings, maybe not quite with the same attendance level that the directors have to have, but they want to keep that connection. And so it's important to have those other parts of the family at your meeting so that you can have that connection. And if something comes up with a question about something, you've got one of those directors there that can address it. And then also when you're running the meeting, setting up the agenda, making sure you have on there what you need to, that you don't get going off into la la land and you can keep things running smoothly and make it an effective meeting. For the participant, don't come to the meeting and open up the package at the meeting if it's a paper package. I see that way too often, and then what ends up happening is after a couple of things are passed, somebody says, "Oh, I wanted to talk about this," and it's something you passed 5 minutes ago. And that is so disrespectful to other people's time. We volunteer, and you've volunteered to step up and be a participant, be a member of the board of directors. And so if you don't want to do it, don't do it. But if you've agreed to do it, do the job. Be respectful to others. Be there, be present, be paying attention. The cell phones are the worst thing for, it's so difficult. And it's even worse on Zoom. And I've done plenty of email while on a Zoom meeting, and we all do it. And it's not being totally present. Back when I was chair of the state, the leadership council got a little annoyed with me at times because I'd make them park their cell phones in little garages on the other side of the room, and they didn't have them. And we got more done. And by the afternoon, people got used to it and actually were paying attention rather than being worried about what's going on their cell phone. So I would prefer a meeting where you put the personal stuff away and have plenty of breaks for people to take care of business, but be present. You've agreed to do it. Be there, be paying attention, review stuff ahead of time. And when you're reviewing things, if you got a question about something, call up the chairman or check with the staff and find out if you're not sure and you think you might be embarrassed to ask something, ask it outside of the meeting, ask it ahead of time so that you understand it. And block out enough time so that you're there for the meeting. We all have things going on, but we also, hopefully like when you schedule a closing and you're at the closing, you don't run off and although I've seen people talking on their phone and doing other stuff, but I guess I'm a little old school that way, that if you're going to be there, be there. If you're not, then that's fine. Don't be there. Okay, so motions. And this is kind of the formal process of a motion. You have the motion, somebody makes the motion, somebody seconds the motion, and you have discussion on that motion. And you get into the details of that discussion. And then if it's straightforward and you've had discussion and you voted up or down. Now, for that discussion, if you're running the meeting, you want to make sure that you get participation by everybody. Those of us that get into this leadership stuff tend to be confident in ourselves, and we tend to talk a lot. And we got to be careful that we're not overzealous in our discussions and taking over the conversation. It's the more experience you have, the easier that is to do, but the more important it is for you not to do it. Because if you're sitting in a small meeting and a couple of the experienced people say, it's a good idea, then the new people, well, it must be a good idea, let's go with it. And you don't end up with much discussion. So as the chairman, you want to, again, use that baton. You know how they pull out the flutes so you can hear them over the trombones. You want to pull out those other voices and bring them forward in the discussion so that you get that opinion. And as the more experienced person, try to sit back. Try not to just jump every time. Maybe you start out the discussion, but try not to overly influence it. Let people get there. And it can be frustrating as an experienced person watching that happen, because you just want to say, if you just do this, it's going to be done. But you can't. Because if you do, then people aren't going to learn. It's just like your kids learning something, roller skating or whatever it is. If they don't fall down, they're not going to get to doing it right. So let the process take place with the directors having a discussion, and chime in as appropriate, but not overdoing it. And as the chair, you've got to be willing to use that baton to bring out, hey, I haven't heard from you or haven't heard from you. What are your thoughts on this? And bring people into that discussion that might not otherwise do it. You'll make for better decisions because you get more input. It could very well be the same decision, but you've got that better input. Plus, you're giving those new people the confidence and the grooming to maybe step forward into other positions as time goes on. They're there for a reason, so respect them and be involved. Where I see chairs get tripped up sometimes is when you have a motion and then somebody wants to make a change to it. So then you have a motion to amend that. We're going to change the word from something from 3 to 5. Okay, there's a motion to change it from 3 to 5. There's a second. Now we want to have discussion just on that amendment. And as a chair, you want to really try to keep track of these things, however, whatever works for you. If it's a note, if it's up on the screen, whatever works best for you. Utilize that and then limit discussion to that. And so what you want to do when you say discussion is remind people this is discussion only on the amendment to changing it from 3 to 5. And if somebody gets off on, I don't like this whole thing, doesn't matter. We're only voting on the amendment right now. We're only having discussion on that. And if you keep things straight like that, the meeting will go a lot easier. So then you have the discussion on whether it's 3 or 5. You take a vote on whether it's 3 or 5. And then now you're back, they voted to change it to 5. So now you're back to the motion as amended. We're going to do this and it's 5. And then you'll have that discussion again. And if they're on the entire amendment, maybe somebody wants to change something else and you have that amendment again. If not, you have the motion. And the other thing with discussion is when you're running the meeting, you have to be cognizant of, okay, if everybody is speaking on one side, we don't need to hear 20 people saying the same thing. It's not an effective use of everybody's time. So if there's a couple people that have said something on one side and you've got 3 or 4 other hands raised, and it's looking like it's all going one direction, then before you call on the next person, just say, okay, we've heard a couple for the motion. Is there anybody opposed? And if nobody's opposed, then you say, okay, let's just move forward with the vote. And you don't, because you always see meetings where it ends up being somebody's calling the question and wanting to end that discussion because they can feel it in the audience. And so if you're conducting the meeting well, you probably won't have to get to that point of having to have a vote to stop discussion. Make sense? Okay. Back when I went too far. Anyway, back when you're talking about discussion, it's important that not only do you get the participation of everybody, but try to debate the policy and not the person. And make sure you frame your discussions, especially as leadership, frame it this way. You don't want to have a motion that says, we don't want to send Natalie to the Inman Conference next year. That's very personal. We could have a motion that says, we're going to not send the chair-elect to this conference, or we're only going to send the chair-elect to these conferences. So then we're debating that no matter who is in that position. Doesn't matter the person. Let's debate the policy, because otherwise it's, oh, we love her, so let's send her. But then, Greg's next, so forget that. We want to debate the policy and keep the person out of it, because otherwise it ends up being personal. And somebody thinks, well, they voted that down just because I was in favor of it. Now I don't like them or whatever. Debate the policy. And then as you're debating these things, and most motions like for CAR come with a dollar amount attached to them. And NAR is really good about that as well, where here's the motion and here's the budgetary impact. In all of these things, you need to stop and consider the time, the talent, the treasure. So who's going to do that? And if who's got the time to do this particular thing that's in the motion? Is it going to be done by staff or by volunteers or both? And if so, especially with staff, if they're going to do this, what aren't they going to do? Because there's only so many hours in a day. And staff is very good about helping us out with our organization. They're very dedicated. And so what I oftentimes see is staff saying, oh, we'll figure it out. We'll just work extra, or we'll figure it out. Well, you need to have that honest discussion, because if you pile too many things on, something's going to fall off. And that's okay if you decide consciously to say, okay, we want you to spend more of your time visiting offices, so we know that you're not going to be going to the chamber meetings or whatever it is. I don't know. But you've got to decide where you're going to spend those limited resources. Talent is, that's the time. Talent is, do we have the expertise to do this? Okay, we want to, the state wants to start back when we had the legal hotline, we're going to start a legal hotline. Okay, do we have the talent to do this? Well, we got to hire an attorney, here's how we can do that. Or we're going to bring somebody in-house, or we moved it in-house because we had the talent to do that. And you have that discussion. And then the time, talent, and treasure, the money. Do you have the money? And I've joked a lot, unfortunately in a negative way, that I think the CAR board of directors has never met a budget augmentation that they didn't like. I like to see personally, if you're going to spend more money, you got to decide where it's coming from, because in essence, you're taking it from something else. Now, it might be coming out of reserves, but would you need those reserves for something else? Or if you've got excess reserves, why are you charging your dues what you're charging? So decide if you have the money and where that's going to come from. Not just, we're not the federal government. We can't just print it. We've got to have a budget. And if you're operating in the negative too long, you're going to go out of business, or you're going to have a difficult time as an association. And then back to what we talked about with diversity on motions is consider all the sides. What are the different perspectives of how this is going to affect people? And then the hardest thing to consider or foresee is the unintended consequences. So, for example, when we passed the motion at NER on MLS that said you had to put a listing in the system within a day unless it was an office exclusive, well, all of a sudden the unintended consequences were that office exclusives became this weird morphed thing into something new, almost into some business models or something different. And so sometimes you can consider those or foresee those things and try to mitigate any negative unintended consequences. And at other times you can't. But do your best to try to see what are if we do this, could something happen that we didn't intend to happen? And if so, how are we going to address that? Or can we make this a little better? Or is it just what it is? So getting into the, that's the discussion. Debate the policy, okay. Kind of this sort of, personalities. And this is more of this could be a whole day of talking about. There's all kinds of personalities. And once you've been on a board for a while, it's when you're first there, especially if you're first running the meeting for the first time, it's a bit overwhelming. You're having hard enough time just figuring out who's going to speak and where you're at on the agenda, let alone the subject matter and how you feel about that. But over time, it gets easier because you've done that. It becomes more natural, and then you can start to notice the personalities on a board. And there's all kinds of interesting personalities that show up on a board. You've got the cheerleader person, that's out there, that any idea that comes up and they're behind it. They're the rah-rah, they're really getting into it and And that's one type of personality. You've got the devil's advocate. Good friend of mine that used to be involved in the association, Bob Most, was very good at being a devil's advocate. For those of you that know Bob, just bringing up that other side that kind of makes you feel a little uncomfortable, but makes you think. There's the Godfather. We've all seen boards with the Godfather that sits back and then people will listen to that person, him or her's thoughts, and they're thoughtful and they're deliberate and they're quiet most of the time, but it's like the old who is it, E.F. Hutton speaks, everybody listens kind of thing. You've got what I call Pete and repeat. The person that's, if they're talking and they say, as I said before, and I want to say it again, and I want to say it again, as a chairman, you've got to try to limit that. Because once somebody starts talking and they say, as I said a minute ago, it's kind of time to move on. And sometimes as a chairman, you don't want to necessarily call people out during the meeting, but have a discussion with them right after the meeting and say, it would really help me running the meeting if I could get you to maybe hold off speaking, or just to let a few other people speak first, or to whatever it happens to be that can help bring that forward. Unfortunately, we always have the clueless person in the meeting that wasn't paying attention and that didn't read the materials, and then they bring something up later, and you can look around the room and see everybody looking like, where were they? Didn't you hear that? So don't be that person. You've got people that sit on the fence, that they look around the room and take the temperature on the vote and see who's voting what before they vote. Again, you're there to do it, so vote. So you've got, I know there's a whole bunch of other type of personalities that I can get into, but it's as a good director or conductor of a meeting, you can start to bring these things out. You can bring out that section at the right time. You can, and it's not manipulative. It's bringing it forward so that you hear all these sides and get all this and make the best music that you can. Voting, that's pretty easy. You're there to vote, so just do it. That's the Nike thing. The circumstances where you don't vote are extremely rare. You shouldn't vote if you have a conflict of interest, and you've got to disclose that conflict of interest. If they're voting to have a caterer at an event, and your wife or your spouse is the caterer, hey, I've got a conflict of interest here, and then depending upon what that is, and depending upon what the board wants to do, maybe you should leave the room. Maybe you should just stay out of the deliberations and not vote, and be recorded as abstaining from the vote. You shouldn't be taking part in that. Now, if it's a really minor thing, like we're doing a contract with Supra, and I own a couple shares of Supra's, or who is it, their parent company's stock. Well, I don't have a conflict of interest because I don't have a material interest in that company. And I think at NAR they have on their conflict of interest, and probably CAR does too. It's got to be a certain level of involvement, like a few percent of stock of a company before you really have a conflict of interest. Other than a conflict of interest, there's no reason for you not to vote. Even if it's a tough question, that's what you're there to do. So vote. And then one voice. So when a board votes on something, that is the decision of the board. And when you go out into the public or into your office, and they say, why the heck did the board vote to do electronic lock boxes? And that's what we felt is the best for the association. It's not, hey, I think it was stupid, I didn't vote for that. You can have the discussion that, yes, I brought up the concerns of how many people are going to use it, what's the cost, and that kind of stuff. But we decided it was best for the association. And that's the board's position. I would hope that when I serve as a chairman of a board or a committee, that nobody could tell how I voted on during that committee when I'm giving that report or bringing that forward, because I've got to bring forward what the board decided to do, not what Greg wants, because oftentimes it's different from what the board said, and that's okay. But I'm bringing forward that one voice from that motion or whatever was coming out of that board or that committee. And it's important for all the committee to do that. And as I mentioned earlier, that confidentiality is critical so that that's a safe place to have discussion in that boardroom, and that people aren't being tattled on because they voted this way or that way. If you're doing that, you're not doing your duty to the association. And so have good, solid, contentious debate. That's fine to bring that stuff out and have very good debate. And if you're debating the subject, not the person, you're going to be able to sit down with them afterwards and have a drink together and still be friends, because you might disagree on what was best for the association, but you live with that vote. Make sense? And then finally, before we get into questions and stuff, oops, that's more about confidentiality. And also your association, whatever board you're on, will have who has the authority to speak for the association. So be careful that you're not out there being quoted on behalf of the association and you think you're giving your personal opinion. Because if somebody knows, even if you're the chairman and you say, well, this isn't the board's opinion, this is my opinion, it ain't gonna fly, because people will take it as the board's opinion. And be careful you're not setting your board up for an obligation that you didn't intend. If you're the chairman of a committee and you want to use, Joe's landscaping for the building committee, you may not have the authority to tell Joe he can do the work. So be careful you don't usurp somebody else's authority and commit the board to something that they're not committed to. Kind of the same thing we just talked about there. Confidentiality, and there's a lot. The social media, the hallway talk, the texting, recording. You can't be recording a meeting unless everybody knows about it and you've gotten the board decides to do that. There's a lot of times where you have something at a committee that's not official until the board of directors approves it. Well, you need to have that discussion at the committee before you leave as to what parts of this can we take out and are public before the board looks at it. And it may be that it's perfectly fine to take all of it out and have that discussion so that the directors hear more discussion, or it may be confidential and you don't take any of it out. So you need to have that discussion so that everybody on the board knows on that particular subject if that's fair game to discuss or not. And then finally, have fun. We don't do this. We're not getting paid for this. Those of us that are volunteers, the staff's getting paid, but the volunteers aren't getting paid for this. So have fun. It's an important job. It's rewarding. It's not brain surgery. You don't want to make mistakes, but you also shouldn't get so overwhelmed with pressure about things. So have a good time doing it. The walk the talk thing is, when you talk about wanting to improve your profession, and how I hear this all the time from pretty much every board, they want to raise the bar. Are you doing it? Are you personally wearing your realtor pin? Are you donating to RPAC? Are you getting educations? Do you have your C2EX or your CRS? Are you doing those things that you're wanting, because we all think that it's them that's the problem. It's not us. But if we're not setting a good example, then where is that? And make use of the resources. If you're in the newsletters, the libraries or the videos or whatever it is that the associations have, make use of that stuff. Back to RPAC, that's kind of a big deal. You know, if you worked in the last couple of years, the state and the local associations were, and even NAR were instrumental in keeping us working during COVID, and to a degree that we could. There's a lot of pressure, especially nationally, to from individual entities or governmental agencies that don't realize that the business, the infrastructure that we've put in as realtors with our MLSs and that marketplace are the most efficient marketplace for buyers and sellers in the world. And they don't realize that. So we've got to constantly keep it out there, what we do, why we're important with the code of ethics, all of that. So any questions, anything anybody would like to add to the discussion? Let me pull up the chat if we have
We
any.
do have some questions, Greg.
Okay, let's go with it. Go
Okay,
ahead.
so first one is, where do committees fall within policy governance? If you're an AE and the BOD forms a committee, who does the work carry out the goals of the committee?
So under policy governance, it depends on, you can have committees of the board, or you can have committees even with under staff. And so it depends on how you want to set that up. If you like like if staff is given a job to accomplish a task, and they need volunteers to do that, then that's over there. If it's the board might have a task force on selecting a new auditor, or a group that reports directly to the board, and then it's the responsibility of the staff to work with the board and staff that committee, because the staff still works with it. It's in general, you have to look at the task and decide how you can effectively get that done within your organization.
Do you have recommendations for, because there are some smaller local associations where they may just have one staff person, for example, an AE. Do you have recommendations maybe for those type of situations if they have committees and they're within policy governance and they don't necessarily have staff to help with that, on what that could look like with their volunteers?
And that's the challenge of a small association with limited resources. I guess there's a couple thoughts. One is, if it's something that you can't do with maybe getting together with other small associations to accomplish, like pro standards is something that I think a lot of small associations look to the state to do, and they can accomplish it that way. But if it's something unique to your area, like Craig is going to have a golf tournament for their association, then you definitely have to have volunteers staffing that to make it happen, because you don't have enough staff people to do that. And so you have to just look at your, you might, the guidance to staff on policy governance would be to hold this golf tournament, but that's in essence contingent upon the board of directors providing staff with enough resources, which might be money, which should also be volunteers. So it's, you can't just, it's not fair to the staff for the board just to say, do this and not support it. The board has to support, give the staff whatever resources are necessary to make that happen. And that might be volunteer effort. I see Kevin's got his hand up.
Kevin?
I would just say that a lot of times the association exec CEO has to take the lead on some of these things and be a little more proactive. And so what that means is being very clear to the board of directors what your operating plan might be. It's almost a strategic plan, and tell them what your limitations are, and review it fairly often so that they don't overdo your workload, because that will drain out the lifeblood of the entire organization. So if you're trying to do more education, don't overdo that. Do one every 2 months and do them Zoom, but have a clear plan yourself as the association executive, what you can do, how much resources you need, et cetera, moving forward. So you're always in a position to have educated the board of directors and have that written plan to remind them that these are the resources we have, and that's it.
Yeah, and as a director, if the staff doesn't come forward at the meeting, and you need to, either the directors or the staff have to come forward when you're voting on something and say, hey, wait a minute, if we're going to do this, what aren't we going to do? And staff needs to be willing to step up and do that. Sometimes I see, too much, oh, I'll just take care of it for them, and I'm being too nice. And that's not necessarily the right way to handle the volunteers. Or if the volunteers, somebody needs to step and say, wait a minute, if we're going to ask them to do all this, how are they going to get these other things done? And that also goes with the relationship with staff that I've seen too, is as volunteers, we don't always know what's the right thing or what's the wrong thing to do. And we tend to get spoiled. So if staff is like, if we're going on a trip and they're lining up our reservations or whatever, you need to have some guidelines as to what's appropriate and what's not for them to do, and they don't need to be spoiling us as volunteers all the time. I understand that there's the gratitude of, hey, we're volunteering our time, so staff wants to make it easy for us and thankful for us. But there's also the line that you go too far and spoil us and make us kings and queens, and we don't need to be. So it's a balancing act there. What other questions do we have here? I need to address something of Chris and something about scolding the staff.
Greg, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Dana.
I wrote it in there, but you ignore it when you get to it. When you take a vote in a meeting, I have seen people immediately text out the result of that vote. When is that public? Is that as soon as it's voted on? Is it the end of the meeting? When is it that you can be public with that vote?
Well, I think that can vary, and you sure need to have that discussion. If you're voting on something big that everybody's anxious to hear about. Okay, we're going to hire a new exec, and we're all anxious to hear whether it was Bob or Joe. You need to have that discussion right then and there at that meeting and say, okay, we're going to vote on this, and here's how we want to announce it. Does it matter? If no, it says doesn't matter, you can text whoever you want to, then text whoever you want to. If it's we're going to put out a statement and live with that, especially if it's something legal, you want to have a written statement that probably you're reading. So it kind of depends upon what it is. I've had plenty of meetings where we say, we can't say a word about this until these minutes get reviewed by legal staff. And then the chairman will let everybody know, okay, it's public, you can talk about it now. So it really depends upon what it is. I hate to say that I'm not giving you an absolute answer, but the best thing is to have the discussion so that the board is all on the same page and somebody doesn't go off saying, well, I didn't know I couldn't tell my office about it. It's important that the staff also need to be sure they know who writes their paycheck. Okay, so yeah, you've got to have a good working relationship with the staff.
I'm happy to talk about that if you
want.
want.
Yes, please do, Chris.
Okay, so I had experiences on another board, not in Colorado. This was in another state, and the CEO was I don't know how to put this delicately. It was a CEO that just didn't give I'm just going to say it, just didn't give a crap about what the board was doing and what the board was saying, and was trying to kind of go off the rails, and used to make our board meetings pretty confrontational. And it was the kind of thing where we sat down, the executive committee had to sit down and just have a conversation with them and let them know that, you know what, we appreciate all the work you do and we appreciate everything that you're doing. But you also need to remember, you know, we're volunteers, you're paid a salary. Without us and the board, the people who pay your salary, there wouldn't be a job, you know, and you have to say it delicately, but sometimes those personalities, sometimes the egos don't stay at the door. And so you have to be really careful. And like I said, this happened in another state. You have to just be really mindful and careful and remind that we're all in this together, whether you're paid or a volunteer, and to please leave the egos at the door. We are here for a purpose, for the greater good. And it's not our own agenda. It is not, you know, if you're on a board and you have an agenda, that's a problem.
Yeah,
So,
the
and I
ego
know it was a
thing-
strong comment, and I apologize, but I just
no, no,
wanted to-
I get it. That's the ego thing is a problem both directions.
yes,
If
I agree.
I sat in a room with AEs, they'd give us horror stories about their presidents or their chairman from year to year, here and there. And it's true. You've got, and so what you did was the correct thing, is you've got to sit down with the appropriate people, not in a public forum, and have that discussion. You're not there to embarrass somebody. You're there to have a discussion about, hey, how can we work with this? You all do it if you've got somebody in your office or a client, or, you know, it's just not working. You've got to have that discussion. It's not easy, but it's also a whole lot better once you've had it, because then one of two things are going to happen. Either the behavior changes, or you make a decision to go a different direction. So, and if you don't, you're just stuck in limbo and upset forever and get off the board because you don't want to deal with it. So that's unfortunate, but having the discussion is the right thing. Any other questions? I know we're coming up on our appointed time, and if people need to get out, they sure can.
Greg, I just wanted to say something really
yes.
quick. I'm
Yes,
Heather Simpson. I am the board president for Pagosa Springs. And this is my second month running our board here. And I just really wanted to thank you for this leadership meeting that we've had. It's just been really helpful for me. And we have a bunch of people on our board that are on this. So I just thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. If there's, you know, there's a lot of us that have been doing this for a long time, and we're all happy to help out where we can. So if you have questions about something, you want to reach out privately or separately or whatever, more than happy to help out, because that's
Awesome.
part of that giving back to the organization.
For sure. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other questions before we, Holly, is there anything that I need to finish up with here?
No, I think that's good, unless anyone has any questions or any clarifying points. I think we're all set.
Okay, well, it was good
Thank
to
you,
see
Greg.
see you all. I wish it would have been in person. It's much better if we can talk in person, but thank you, and hope to see you at something soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you, Greg.
You're welcome. Take care.